Welcome to another episode of Artist Spotlight, the podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Stringer. And on this episode, we're joined by photographer Zoe Larson, who has just recently been featured in Lens magazine for her work in Papua New Guinea, and just a really fascinating woman doing some really interesting work. And I know you'll enjoy that. As usual, the podcast is brought to you by your friends at the Maryland Photography Alliance, where you can check out everything they have going on. They have contests and they have photo walks, get-togethers, information about new skills and techniques that you may want to learn. And I'm sure that if you check out the website and you come back 10 days later, there's new information there. You can learn and you can connect with like-minded people. Always fun to make friends doing something that you love. So definitely encourage you to check out mdphotoalliance.org. And with no further ado, I'd like to welcome Zoe Larson to the podcast.
Hello, hello.
So Zoe's work is, quite simply put, beautiful work. She really got, I think, and you're the best person to say, but fully immersed in what you did in Papua New Guinea with the Mudmen. So how is it that you did your photo essay of the Mudmen? What got you interested in that, and how'd you make that happen?
Well, I have a background, or I studied anthropology in college, so I kind of grew very fond in, the aspect of anthropology and getting to the root and cause of cultures and, what that pertains to photography. And pretty much the setup of our studio with the Mudmen is we walked in, we had a big backdrop, lights, and I kind of thought to myself, I was like, man, I really would love to know. I mean, of course, with all the tribes as I went in, I wanted to know more about who they are, as opposed to like, let me just take a picture and, the viewer will just know what's going on. So I arranged with our guide, David, and he helped me set up interviews with every single tribe that we went to. And with the Mudmen, I talked to a wonderful man named Henry, who was an elder, and he actually had traveled to Australia, London. He got out of the country, which was amazing. But yeah, pretty much we would sit down and I would ask them about, what is it to be a Mudman? And, what I kind of got down to the basics of what religion do you practice? What does a day in the life look like? And it was all really incredible information. And I think the biggest takeaway was that life isn't really much different. As you travel across the globe, you still have these basic fundamentals in each community, which is really special. Everyone farms, they take care of their family, they take care of their elders. It's just beautiful to see such a tight-knit community.
So, as you're explaining this, I've got more and more questions that sort of percolate in my brain. So you mentioned a studio environment. So how did the idea of sort of a makeshift studio get introduced to the tribal people? And did they seem comfortable or apprehensive about, being invited to do something like that?
Well, the studio equipment was brought to Papua New Guinea by Randy and our guide David. So they kind of set everything up, and I would say they were a little, it's a little daunting to come in front of, I would say I think there were four or five photographers. I mean, you could tell they were a little shy, and it was kind of sweet. Again, the beauty in Papua New Guinea, at least, is that everyone speaks English. They speak Pidgin English, and English. So we were able to communicate with them very clearly throughout the whole process. So I think with that, we were able to connect and, relate on a level of, hey, it's okay. We can, are you comfortable with this? Or how does this feel? And what pose makes you comfortable and makes you feel represented? So it was very cool and interesting. And it was awesome to bring, the photos, I think my favorite photos were those used with the studio backdrop and lights. I think those to me are the ones that pop the most. So I think it was really, really fun.
I think that, it's clear that from a journalistic perspective, you were not just there, making pictures, but you were engaging with people. You were, you're interviewing, you're talking, you're having a conversation. And I guess, as that area has enjoyed increasing levels of popularity for travelers, I think you probably do have a certain number of people who go, they take pictures, they leave. And you afforded them the opportunity to be treated not as a photo subject exclusively, but as a person. And I've got to believe that the comfort level that you established with them helped make for better pictures.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, I mean, to hear them talk and to see, especially when you sit down for the first time, they're nervous. I was nervous. I graduated with an anthropology degree, but I mean, that doesn't involve, work talking to people like in field work. So it's all new to the both of us. So of course you're a little shy and it's like, okay, well, I have a few questions. Like, I hope you have more to say than just a quick answer or two. But then that's where like these beautiful stories would just flow out and it would just be this amazing connection between, you know, two very different cultures that can relate and come, just unite. It was really special to be able to have those connections. And again, at the end of it, we would exchange WhatsApp numbers and I still talk to most of the people in Papua New Guinea today and it's a year later. So I feel very fortunate to have like created such amazing bonds with the people there.
One of the things that I think is great is that you did not have a language barrier, which when you layer working with someone who is not of the same background and doesn't have necessarily the same rituals as you, when you layer on language being different, that just really is a huge hurdle. So for that major hurdle not to exist, that's great. But at the same time, I would imagine that they were about as much a fascination for you as you were to them, even though there are increasing numbers of travelers that go there. It's not happening probably every day. So here you are, and you're a Westerner, you're a female who's there, and you're interacting with them. They were probably as curious about you as you were. Now, did you get to a point in the conversation where they were asking you questions, or was it more more of almost like a casual, but almost like an interview kind of thing?
Oh no, they absolutely asked me questions. And funny enough, the one question they all asked was, "Oh, are you married? Do you have kids?" And at the time I was single and they were like, "Oh my gosh, you don't have, what? Like, you're not married? You don't have kids yet?" And it was really surprising. I guess it was a surprising thing for them to hear because I think, I'm sure the notions of, especially a young female traveling to a place like that, they people I think would assume that you're not, not a single independent person, that you have, your family and your home and your kids back in the States. So that was the one question that came out a lot. But yeah, they were equally as interested. We would and I have everything recorded too. So most of the interviews, it was just, it was just a conversation. They'd ask me a question, I'd ask them a question, you know, it was very mutual.
Now that's cool. In a different context, 5 years from now, you say, "I'd like you to meet my husband, Henry the Mudman," because you met him in New Guinea during the interview. Who knew? But he dresses a little different, but he's really a great guy, and we all speak English. Uh, that's great. So I guess I know that your family is very outgoing, very adventurous, likes being outdoors. I know your mom loves travel. What do you think it was that kind of instilled this interest in you, and when to kind of travel, either with photography being a part of it or even with it not being a part of it? When did that happen?
That the passion for photography happened at, I would say, a young age. My family was in a very tragic car accident in 2010. I was 10 years old. And my mother, coming out of that, used photography as an outlet and kind of a therapeutic method to help her process through, her trauma and her feelings at the time. So from that, I would say from 10 forward, there was always a camera in her hand and she would dress up me and my siblings in dresses and have us go stand in the woods. And she kind of would pose us and photograph us and we were her little subjects. And it was for a while when we were younger, it was the other way. We were always in front of the camera. and my mom was behind the camera. And then soon enough, we kind of were like, oh, you have a lot of cameras. I wondered, like, I kind of want to play around with those. And she has a huge film camera collection too. So she'd be like, okay, take that one and give that one a go and show us how to work it. And then we would just run around and take pictures of stuff. So I would say photography happened around that age. And then, as we got a little bit older, 12, 13, my parents, or my mom and my grandfather, would take us on month-long road trips every summer. So we would pack us up in a Sprinter van and we would just go west. And that, I think, was the beginning of, learning how to travel, because learning how to travel is a whole different, what to pack, how to act, how to take in new environments in a way that's going to reflect and that you're going to be able to, make yourself. So I think that's when that started. And then as we got older, my mom was like, oh, okay, like let's go overseas. Let's go to Prague, let's go to Ethiopia, let's go to Kenya, let's go here. And so we kind of just, my sister sometimes travels with us and my brother sometimes travels with us, but mainly it's me and my mom I go everywhere with her. Anywhere she wants to go, I'm like, I'm in, let's go. And then my dad is not the travel, he likes to travel, but not the type of travel that we like to do. So he kind of stays in the background and, stays at home and takes care of the animals while we go off and do our thing.
Yeah, that's so cool that, not only, and obviously for your mom, it was very much of a healing thing, which I think a lot of people who have been through, various situations also use it as a way to, this is not a pun intended, but to focus on something else and to really sort of embrace something. And obviously that's done that, for her certainly, and then to teach you guys and to make it available. And one thing about her having a lot of cameras, just like camera bags, you can never have too many cameras or camera bags. So we just have to get that out there now. Something as a native Floridian, you can probably appreciate. Years ago, I overheard a couple saying, why would you travel all over the world? It's expensive, it's time consuming, you can have flight issues. If you can just go to Epcot, you can see the whole world in like a day, maybe 2 days. And I just looked at them with such deep sadness because they weren't kidding. So a lot of the people, the range of people who listen to this podcast is everything from the person who's not really a photographer, but they're curious about it, to amateur photographers, serious amateur photographers, and then all the way up and through professional working photographers. But even those that are professional and working photographers may be doing so in their community or in their region or domestically in the US. So my question for you that you could kind of share with everybody is, what has photography and travel around the world given you? How has it helped you grow? And what would you say to a person who kind of wants to do that, but they're just a little hesitant?
I would say the biggest thing that I've learned and taken is empathy. And I think learning to travel and going to travel with an intention to learn. Because I think a lot of people go places as an escape, which I understand, like, oh, let me go to Mexico and run away for a weekend. But to go somewhere and really, like, not be a fly on the wall, but really observe what's around you. What are people doing? Like, what's the atmosphere like? What is the architecture? And I think that sitting down and being quiet and still with those feelings and being able to just observe and relate to people, and I think that's like the biggest thing I've learned. And to be given opportunities to speak to locals and just interact, especially in tribal settings. Like in Ethiopia, they did not speak the same language, but you had that language barrier, but we would sit down and they'd play with my bracelets, or at the time I remember having a necklace that had a butterfly on it, and they grabbed the necklace and they, were saying what butterfly meant in their language. And just kind of, you have these little relations that remind you that we all are human. And despite the gap of somebody that lives in Ethiopia versus somebody that lives in New York. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all united and we're all together. And that's a really special, beautiful thing to hold on to at the end of the day.
It is. It is. And, one of the things that I have thought is, when you obviously Americans are viewed however they're viewed by, other people in other countries. And sometimes it's positive, sometimes negative, sometimes neutral. But what I have felt traveling to different countries is I feel like, as a general comment, when I've been there, people are generally more welcoming towards me than a lot of Americans are when I travel around the US. I feel like, a lot of times these other countries, I think there may be something of a fascination with Westerners who are traveling there. So there's not a lot of, I'll use the word, there's not a lot of attitude that you get. I mean, you can get some, but I find that they're more curious about us because we made the decision to go there where they live. So that's got to at least cut us a little slack because it wasn't easy to get there wherever there is. I mean, do you see that, or do you think that it's not necessarily different than when you've traveled domestically in the US?
I would say it depends on where you're going and who you're around. Because in the States, there's been places where I go and I go to, you go to get a cup of coffee, and sure enough, you meet somebody that you spark up a conversation with, and you're like, wow, that's, look at that. I went to get a coffee and here I come out with a new friend. And when you're traveling abroad, wherever there may be, I think it's you never know who you're going to run into and what you can relate about with another person. And again, at the end of the day, I think we can relate to anybody and anything because we're all human. But I mean, I do feel like, of course, when you travel abroad, there is a more welcoming sense. But I don't know, when I first think of that, it almost, is it derived because we're a tourist and they want tourism, therefore they want to treat everybody who's not from there, or new people with welcome and opening arms, so that we can bring back more people and come back in the future. Because I know in Papua New Guinea, I bring that up because that's my most recent trip that I have been on. But when we were there was an immediate mood switch when we walked into a place and immediately people wanted to give you service. They wanted to help you with your bags. They wanted to, make sure you had every little thing you needed. And I think that is derived because tourism is just now very up and coming in Papua New Guinea. Of course, there's always been people that visited, but they're really working on building their infrastructure to have more tourism. And I could feel that when I was there. I could feel the extra push to be like, hey, we're here, come back. We want more people. Tell everyone to come here. Like, we're great. And they were great. And everything about that trip was amazing. But you feel that a little bit. And when you ask that question, that's kind of the first thing that comes to mind is, yes, they are welcoming. And yes, some countries are nicer than others. But when I first think of it, it makes me think of tourism and like, we want the people, bring the people here. We're going to be nice and welcoming because we want it all. And not in a selfish way, of course, but like,
oh yeah,
yeah.
Well, it's there's countries and people generally want to be prosperous, and if they see people coming, and really the requirement is that you be pleasant and you provide reasonable service, and more people will come and they will stay there. And there's a benefit to the individuals, a benefit to the whole community. I know when I was in Bangladesh, which is rarely visited by Westerners, we got asked by a number of people, what do you think of Bangladesh? What do you think of our beaches? What do you think of the food here? We were, it was like, like a real life comment box, tell us what you think, would you come back? Tell a friend. I mean, it was, they were very, very interested to hear what we had to say. I know when people ask me how I would recommend that they prepare for traveling, especially when you're traveling abroad, outside of your comfort level, multiple flights, different airports, different food, different languages. I always say the number one thing is be patient. Take a breath. Your timing for things is not necessarily their timing. Sometimes that's cultural. Oftentimes it's cultural. And always remember, you're not in your country, you're in their country. Things are going to go wrong. Be prepared for it. And I say that to set up a situation that happened to you in Ethiopia when your guide and your mom and others decided we're going to go to the Omo Valley for an amazing day of photography. So maybe you could share with listeners. It's like the Gilligan's Island opening, if you know the beginning of that. But so, how did the day start, and where did it go from there?
Well, the day started, I believe, at 4:30 a.m. So a very early morning. Mind you, the hotel that we had stayed in the prior night, we found out a year later, 6 months after we stayed in that same hotel, it got burnt on fire from people throwing, like, I guess alcohol or something, and like completely the people who were there blew the hotel up. So
Okay.
fun fact about where we stayed the night before, a little bit, none of us slept well. Woke up at 4:30, got on the roads being,
Packed dirt, basically.
yes, packed dirt, very, very bumpy. For about, I would say, like 4 or 5 hours, we went up these hills and, going 20 miles an hour, the car moving side to side, kind of just barely going up this mountain on this very, very dirt rocky road. So that was like the beginning of it, and we all were kind of like, wow, this is going to be a long day. Let's hope for the best. And then when we started to get into the Omo Valley, that's when everything went very downhill. It had rained the night before, and the roads are muddy. And so we finally get to the entrance of where we're going in. We're like, all right, we got this. We're here. The guide says, we've got 4 hours. We're going to be there. So don't worry. Everyone just relax. We're like, okay, cool. As we start, the first car gets stuck in the mud. And we're like, oh, shoot, that's not good. Okay. All the cars stop. Everyone gets out. They get the car unstuck. We go 2 more miles. The third car gets stuck. And so this went on for about, we went 10 miles and it took us maybe 3 hours. Wow. So it was just this kind of cat and mouse game of getting stuck, not stuck, and just, trying to get as far as we can for where we're supposed to end up, which was the Surrey tribe that night. So we're, kept trucking along. And then we get to this car that was tipped over from a previous group that I guess went through a few weeks ago. And we're like, oh, that's interesting. That car is fully tipped over and really stuck in the mud. Like, we have to go through there. What are we going to do? And the guide's like, no, we'll be fine. We got it. Like, we're doing good. And these poor guys have been digging the cars out of mud for the whole day. They're driving, digging. It's a mess. They had to be exhausted. Like, all the love to them. I think our driver's name was Million. Every time that I'm going down a rough road, I'm like, if he can do it, we can do it. Like, yeah. So we get to a point though where the sun's starting to go down, and we have only made it halfway through where we're supposed to be. At that time, one of the cars was stuck. Sun's going down. We're like, okay, we can't go any further. We are really stuck. We're done, and we're not going to drive at night because that's just dangerous. And we can't see the roads. It's already a bad situation. And so the guide's like, well, we have food, we have water. Do you guys want us to we're going to have to spend the night in the car, but do you want to spend the night in the car? And we're like, do we have a choice? And it was around that point, around sundown too, where 2 Surrey men who are out in the bush walk up. So we're stopped, the car's stuck. We're kind of just sitting in the cars. These 2 naked men, because they, out there, they don't really, sometimes they wear a cover on their bottom, but these were 2 they were straight up naked men walking with AK-40s, 47s wrapped around their chest.
That was their accessory. No clothes, just no the clothes. Rifle.
Yeah, just the rifle, nothing crazy. And they walk up and they knock on our window, and I'm looking and I'm like, okay. And I roll my window down and they put their hand in to shake our hand. I'm like, hey.
Not awkward at all.
No, not awkward at all.
Everything's good here.
Everything's fine. And they kind of just went from each car and just shook their hands, and then they hung out with us for the rest of the night. I think we gave them water. Yeah.
Yeah.
And no, we kind of just accepted our fate. And we're like, okay, this is
Wow.
what we're doing. Like we're sleeping in the middle of the bush right now. And we have these two guys who, they have guns, they have guns on them, but I guess we're fine. We don't know. And then they're telling us that there's like big cats that are out in the, out in the bush, and that, we'll be fine, but just don't go outside at night. If you have to, if you have to go to the bathroom, just go right by the door. And we're all like, okay, we're good. And at this point, as you can imagine, my mom was like freaking out. She was a total mess. And my sister and I were just like, oh, we're going camping. Like, this will be fine. Completely naive to the situation. But yeah, and we made Randy sleep in the car with us because my mom was like a nervous wreck. So Randy slept in the car with us and kept us company. And yeah, we camped out overnight in the bush and everything was fine. Woke up the next morning. We were stuck really bad, so we didn't go anywhere. We kind of just were like, all right.
So how did you get out of there finally?
It took half the day for them to dig the car out, but they ended up getting the car out, and we, get stuck, unstuck, up all the way until we got to Surrey land. Yeah, it was a roller coaster. It was very. I at the time I was 19, and I couldn't help but find the whole situation comical, because I think I was naive to the situation. But
Sure.
we'd get stuck and I'd be like, oh, all right,
Wow.
what's next? We'd get out, walk around, and just, it was what it was.
I got to believe though that with all your travels, like that was the most kind of serious, delay or whatever or unplanned event that you've run into. Is that true, or have you had something that was like even more head shaking than that?
I would say that was the most head shaking, just given the fact that in the case we had to spend another night there, we might not have had food or water. So
Right.
that was kind of the most, as I look back on it, I would say maybe life threatening, possibly.
Mm-hmm.
But when I was in Papua New Guinea, the flight system there is absolutely a train wreck. So you're not guaranteed on your flight. Any flight that you've booked that is within Papua New Guinea, it's not guaranteed that you're going to get on that plane. So we didn't miss two flights, but they canceled two of our flights to from Port Moresby to the Highlands. So we had to last minute get a hotel, figure out where we were going to stay. And we'd wait at the airport for 4 or 5 hours just for our next flight to get canceled. So that was very frustrating. And we all had to kind of sit back and take a breath and be like, okay, any flight that we get on or that we book, it's not guaranteed that we're going to be getting on that flight. So that's probably the runner up.
It's just, that whole thing about flexibility, if you want to go somewhere and you want everything to run more or less like clockwork, there's lots of resorts in the US and all over the world where you book a tour, it starts and it finishes, and you can travel all over. You can travel all over to Brazil or Africa, Japan, wherever. And you're probably not going to run into that kind of situation that you did. But at the same time, the further afield you go, it's the real world. These things happen. And so as a traveler, you just have to decide, what am I up for? And you go with an experienced tour leader, in your case, Randy, who does a phenomenal job. And they're prepared from a mindset standpoint, and then oftentimes from a backup standpoint, what are we going to do if this happens or that happens? And yeah, sometimes you just roll with it. Well, I know that people are going to listen to the podcast and they're going to want to read Lens magazine that just featured your story. How did it come that you got this really phenomenal article about you in Lens magazine? How did all that come together?
Honestly, it was very, I mean, I use the word random, but I had all these photographs, and throughout my travels, I've never really done anything with my photography. I have a portfolio site that I update that's kind of for me, so I can keep, I have a way of organizing my images and keeping everything together. And it got to a point where my boyfriend actually and my mom were like, do something with your photos. Your Papua New Guinea photos are great. Do something with them. Do something with them. I was like, okay, whatever, maybe. But I had a week off work. I sat down, edited everything, wrote a bunch of stuff. And I was like, okay, well, now what? I guess I'll submit to some photo contests and see what happens. Really genuinely not expecting anything at all. I just was, I was like, I got to do something. I have all these images. Let me submit them. One of the places I submitted was Lens Magazine. And I got an email, 3 weeks later, and they're like, hey, you've been selected to be, in our magazine. And I was like, what? That's insane. And lo and behold. So I really
that's
just
so
wasn't
cool.
expecting it. Yeah, it's cool. Very grateful.
The more people I talk to, that sort of general story has become more frequent where someone says, why not me? And they take their work, whether it's photos with a narrative or just photos, and they'll submit it to a publisher, they'll submit it to a magazine, newspaper. And next thing you know, it's like, I can't believe I got a cover story in the New York Times. It's just weird. And I think that there's a lot of people who have a lot of talent, and either because they're busy with other things or they kind of doubt that anything will come of it, that it keeps them from saying, why not me? And not taking, a reasonable amount of time to do what you just said you did, the editing and the writing. And it's so rewarding I think it's rewarding to have your perspective acknowledged by others. And you find that, like, once you let it free in the world, it's like other people like this. Wow. It's kind of validating in a way.
Very much so. And I mean, just the snowball effect that has come from Lens Magazine publishing me. I mean, this podcast, I just recently spoke to someone in Vero Beach who runs a gallery. I'm going to be doing a show in February with all my work. It's just, it's interesting to me. I'm like, wow, that was all it took for me to, I just had to submit my photos to a photo contest and, hope for the best. And here we are. So it's very cool.
A friend of mine, a photographer who unfortunately passed away fairly recently, Ricky Powell, what Ricky used to say to me is, it's amazing when you put on your pants, put on your shoes, and get out the door. It's like you just get started, and there's a certain momentum that sometimes each of us has to start. But once we start it, it does go from there. So that's awesome about the show. So, one of the questions I like to ask people is, how did they get started in photography? And you talked about, your mom and her, and really enjoying photography and having the camera. But from a way to see the world perspective, literally photography skills, would you consider yourself to be self-taught, or did your mom or others kind of talk to you about, shutter speed and f-stop and composition and those kind of things?
I would say it's self-taught. I mean, I took photography in high school, but I don't think I really grasped the brevity of, how to work a camera and what everything meant and how to work everything. I think just playing around with stuff, and that's the best way to learn anything, is to sit there and tinker with it and be like, okay, you have your base knowledges of, okay, if I have this ISO, then I need this f-stop and shutter speed. Once you get like the basics of it, I think playing around with it, you can just endless possibilities. And I have to admit, when I'm not shooting on, if I'm not traveling and doing photography, I'm mostly shooting on a point and shoot film camera. So, for me, it's just me, what I'm doing in my day-to-day life. If I'm going on a hike or I'm hanging out with my friends, I'm just using a little point and shoot and just, going about my day. So when it does come down time to lock in and we're going to be using lights and I got to make sure all my settings are right, I definitely have to do a refresher in my brain to sit there and be like, okay, what are the settings again? Like, let's get this right.
Well, you have so many interests, in terms of travel and photography. I know you do surfing, you've got animals, you love the outdoors. And, I think that, that curiosity is one of the things that I don't know whether you call it a skill or a trait, but it's one of those things that as anyone gets older, if they maintain their sense of curiosity, you probably don't ever grow out of that. Do you recognize, I guess, that you have this sense of curiosity and kind of exploring all these things, or does it just come so natural that you don't even really think about having it? It just happens.
I would say most of the time I don't realize until I start, if I'm meeting new people or I'm making a new friend, or that's kind of when I start to reflect and be like, oh my gosh, okay, so you're interested in just surfing and just photography. And, I have to find another friend that's interested in travel and another friend that's just interested in vintage clothing or whatever the topic may be. I find it really hard to relate to people and find other people that have kind of like the similar all encompassing hobbies as me. Cause me and my family, we like and do so much that you like, there's not a lot of people that have the opportunity or the means to do such a wide array of things. So I think that's the only time that I really recognize it when I'm like, oh wait, there's not a lot of like, I can't find a lot of other people that are doing the same stuff. But yeah.
Yeah, it's in a way it's an eclectic mix of things, but when you look at it in its entirety, it makes perfect sense. You're not kind of locked into it like, oh, she's this person or she does that. Sometimes people, by necessity, there's only so many hours in the day, and it's like they wake up and they go running because they absolutely love running, and then they get dressed and they do their day job, and maybe on the weekends they're in like a running club or something. And but you're doing so many things. If one thing is a little slow or the weather's not great, there's always like five other things that you can get into. So it definitely makes it to where life is not at all boring. So with you having done the project in New Guinea, what's next on your list, either to travel to somewhere or just, this photography thing seems like it's kind of growing a bit, coming from the Lens magazine article and some of these other doors that it's opening. So either do you have things planned, or do you have things that maybe are at least are in your mind that you want to do?
Well, so far, like as far as trips booked, I'm going to Patagonia on a backpacking trip in April. Of course, I'm going to bring my camera, but I think that's more leisure and for myself as opposed to photography. But I haven't really kind of thought up anything else, like any other places of course, there's a million places I want to go, but I'd only have that trip booked, and then possibly going back to New Guinea in, I believe, next fall, next October. So that one's kind of not set in stone yet, but on the radar.
What are you, if you do go back to New Guinea, would you go back and see the Mudmen again, or is this a different area that you're thinking about?
It covers pretty much, I think we'd be going to the same areas, but I think a few new ones. And I was talking to Randy, and he was thinking of doing an extension to the coastal regions around the Sepik River. I don't know how to, but there they have some incredible tribes that it would be such an honor to talk to and photograph. So
and
hopefully.
and you're talking about Randy Hanna, and hopefully I'd like to have actually Randy on a future podcast episode. So that'll kind of help connect the dots between your experience traveling with him, my own experience traveling with him, and then actually having Randy on here. So you mentioned that a lot of times when you're hanging out with friends and just doing whatever, you're using kind of a point and shoot. What was it, camera and lens wise, that you used for the Mudmen series?
I rented a Leica SL, I think a Leica SL2. I shot on what did I shoot on? My mom is an avid Leica shooter, so I borrowed one of her lenses, and I can't remember, gosh, I can't remember what lens I used.
It seemed like it might be like 35 and 50s and something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. Definitely a 50. I know I was shooting a 50, but I can't remember. I shot wider angle and I think a 50. I'm not sure. Sorry. I
Yeah.
don't
No,
like
no, it's okay. Yeah, I'm thinking like the portraits, like the close-up portraits, like a 50 would be great for something like that.
Yeah, I had to have been shooting that. I'm not, yeah.
Yeah, because generally they'll have like a 50 and a 75, and those are kind of typical portrait lenses. And with the Leicas, yeah, you can go down to like f2. So they're pretty good at gathering light, even though you had light
Mhm.
that you were able to bring in. So if you're talking to people who are thinking about a trip to somewhere they haven't been before, whether it's clothing or it's pre-trip prep or your mindset going in, what kind of advice do you have for people who are considering getting out of their comfort zone?
As far as rugged travel, I think the biggest thing I've learned is pack light. What you think you're going to wear and like, oh man, maybe I should, bring that extra pair of pants. I think it's all mental. You think you're going to need that extra article of clothing, but at the end of the day, I'm an overpacker, so I can speak from experience. I never wear it. Whatever that extra thing I bring, I don't use it. I don't wear it. I sit and I carry it around for the whole trip. Most of the time on these rugged trips that I've been on, I wear one outfit most of the time. Maybe two pairs of pants and like three or four pairs of shirts, and that's it. So packing light and having the correct equipment, like a light packing rain jacket or a light packing just anything, stuff that can compress and go really small and fast drying too.
Yeah.
That's the base thing: lightweight and light packing.
I mean, I know pretty much whenever I travel in these situations, like at the end of each day when I take a shower, I'm showering and washing clothes in the shower. And, by the time you hang it before you go to, whether you have dinner before or whatever, typically by the time you wake up in the morning, they're dry. And even if you have like another set of clothes just to switch off, by the time you get back the following midday, like they're definitely dry at that point. So, you really don't need stuff. And I think my accommodation that I do bring for the plane, and sometimes when I sleep, if it's like a chilly environment, I'll bring like a hoodie for the plane, and I'll bring like a pair of like nylon pants, like quick drying pants. I'm not a fan of the zip off ones where it can be shorts too. I'm not going there. That I can't.
I love those.
Yeah. That for me, that's a bridge too far. But if you could imagine those, but without the zip off lower half. So I'll bring two of those pants. I'll bring a hoodie. I'll bring two pair of quick dry shorts and like three or four t-shirts, and I'm good. I mean, I'm good for a week. I'm good for 2 weeks.
And you know what? The beauty of that is there are so many brands nowadays that, especially as a female, I love my clothing. I love fashion. I love all that stuff. They make stuff that will look good and look cool, that is quick drying, easy to pack. Like I feel so grateful to be in a day and age where I can get all the things I need in one pair of pants and one shirt, one jacket, whatever. So it's so awesome to know, like, if you make the investment in the pieces that, you can wear for a lifetime, that are comfortable and all of the above, it pays off. So I think also investing in your closet for travel is very important.
I have an absurd number of olive color clothing and tan color clothing. Just my daughter calls it my safari fit, because if she sees me wearing it and I'm not going on a trip, she's like, Dad, there's no lions outside. Because if I wear khaki or olive, she's like, you're wearing the safari. I have been on dirt runways, and I've seen these little prop planes come in from the larger cities, and I've seen these safari groups coming. And I will say it's more often women than men, but they will get off of the plane looking like they had watched the Out of Africa movie, with these big round hats, and they've got like leopard print shirt and shorts and like slip-on sandals. And I'm just looking at them going, oh my God, unless you have like a dry cleaner coming with you, like that's just not going to be sustainable. And I've said to other travelers, nobody cares what you wear. You are all in the same boat, either literally or figuratively. Just roll with it. And that's probably a phrase that you could apply to traveling in more rugged parts of the world. It's just roll with it.
Oh, for sure, for sure. Like that is such a truth. Like nobody's looking, nobody cares. And again, at the end of the day, you're on that trip for yourself. If you're worried about what someone else thinks about your outfit, I mean, you're there for the wrong intentions.
Yeah. Now, with you living and working in the South Florida area, you're around so much fashion and culture and architecture. There's the expression about how the shoemakers' kids have holes in their shoes. So you live in this highly photographic area with people and architecture and fashion. Do any of those kind of cross your mind as other areas to get into or expand your photography? Because it's right there where you live and where you work.
I mean, interestingly enough, it's hard. I think you living in a place, you lose sight of the little beautiful things. I mean, there could be this amazing building or this really, awesome photo that you of a guy sitting at the laundromat every day that you pass. But I think for me, I'm guilty of it. I lose sight of it. And it's, I'll be on my way to work and I'm like, oh, I can't stop and take my camera out, or, I'm not even focused on that because it's not in my wheelhouse right now. I mean, the one thing we do take advantage of, me and my family, is, the nature in Florida and the really special, unique landscapes we have. So we go to the Everglades, we go to the Fakahatchee Strand. I mean, even 30 minutes west of Vero Beach, we go into the swamp all the time, every other weekend. And we'll just walk in the middle of nowhere, have our cameras and our water bottles, and just kind of get lost, even though, you're in like a little preserve. But we go out in nature a lot, and we take advantage of whatever Florida has to offer, because we are so fortunate to have such great beauty and unique beauty that's only, it's only in Florida. But we take advantage of that a lot.
Yeah, I know my daughter went to college in Orlando, and I would drive 45 minutes away from Orlando, and there was this wetland, and I would go there with my 400 millimeter lens, and I'd be walking, and then I'd look straight ahead, and next thing you know, there's like an 8 foot alligator just looking at me, and I'd look at him, and then he would just keep going, and he would go back into the water, and now that said, when I would walk past there, I would walk in the middle of the path, not near the edge, not near the water, but just the sheer amount of bird life and owls and snakes and just I think there's something about being out in nature. Obviously, you have to be responsible. You have to really have your awareness with you, but you can be not far from a city. And when you're out with wildlife, it's just such a relaxing experience.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people lose sight into, the beauty that's an hour away from home. I mean, I think in most cities, you drive an hour out and you can be in some sort of nature, or even closer to home, depending on where you're living. But, it just takes that extra step to be like, okay, again, I check myself all the time. I don't have to go all the way across the world, or I don't have to go all the way across the country to go see beautiful things. I can walk out in my backyard or drive 30 minutes, wherever, and I can sit down and I can have a beautiful experience in nature that I don't have to go all the way far away.
Yeah, it's kind of like you don't have to set aside your photography for when you plan that trip. And that's why people all the time say, what's your everyday carry camera, and it can be your cell phone, it can be a point and shoot, it can be any number of things. But I would say most days out of the week I have a small camera bag in my trunk with a camera, because I could be in between meetings or whatever. And if I have an hour and a half free, and I can walk the streets of a little town or a city or whatever, there's always going to be light and shadow and people and architecture. And, it's kind of a great mental break from whatever you were in the middle of to kind of get lost in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I usually, and I have a big silly sprinter van that's my everyday car. So within that, I always have, I keep my Leica Q2 in there, and I keep a Holga, and I use the Holga the most, actually. That's my favorite. I mean, I bring that thing everywhere because it's so light that I can keep it in my purse or a tote bag, and it's nothing to carry. I don't even feel it. It's just part of my purse. And I get some really fun photos on that camera because they're very experimental. You don't really know what you're going to get at the end of the day. And to me, that's the fascination, because I think the way photography to me is something that's fun. And of course, it's important. It documents it, tells a story. But for my day to day, it's just fun. If I'm sitting with my friends or my family, that's what's important to me in that moment. And that's what my photography reflects when I'm, in between travel. It's, nature, family, and friends, because those are my special points.
Yeah, I have not used a Holga yet. I think the closest thing that I use is the Hipstamatic app on my phone because it's got all the lenses and the film types. And like you said, sometimes you're not exactly sure exactly what's going to be in focus totally. And now, I mean, when I'm shooting paid work, obviously I need to know exactly what's going to be in focus. But just for fun and the Leica you mentioned is great because it's got those different digital zoom options. So if you shoot in RAW and JPEG, you can zoom in with the digital zoom, but then you still have the full image in RAW. If you want to do something with it. So definitely the Holga, super fun. Like you said, it's like a roll of the dice, but it's fun. And with the Leica, you're definitely not going to go wrong.
Oh,
So you've got some good tools there at your disposal for sure.
yeah. And I can thank my mom because my mom, it's technically her hand me down Leica. So she wanted to upgrade and she's like, do you want this? And I was like, yeah, I want that. So thank you, mom.
Yeah, that's not a tough thing to say. Yes, and thank you.
Exactly.
No doubt. Well, I know that people who have been listening are going to want to know where they can follow your work, your photography stuff on social media. What's a good way for them to see what you're doing photographically?
I have a portfolio site and it is Zoe Rose Larson, ZoeRoseLarson .myportfolio.com.
Okay. Well, that's great. So people can check that out. And if you have information about upcoming events and things, and you at some point put the gallery show on there and whatever else, people can follow your work and hopefully see your work continue to evolve. It's beautiful stuff, and I know that people will enjoy it. For everybody who wants to know what I have going on, probably the best way is to follow what I'm doing on Instagram, and that's just Mitch Stringer Images on Instagram. You can, of course, go to mitchstringerimages.com, but I think probably Instagram is the best to see the latest, usually posting there daily or every other day. If you have any questions, shoot me a DM, shoot me an email. Pretty good about getting back timely. So definitely encourage people to do that. I'm always happy to help. Until then, I wish everybody great light. I wish you happy shooting, and we'll talk to you again soon.